I'm going to try to talk a little bit about what we do on the local level after this crew creates all the problems that you've been looking at all the pictures for. And I'm also going to talk a little bit about some history of floods in Buncombe County that I've experienced. My first one was back in 1973. Yes, I've been around a long time. I've been with the county for 42 years, and I've seen a lot. And I've seen a lot of floods, and floods are our major hazard here in Buncombe County, flash floods in particular. But when you look at some of the problems, and going back to 10 years ago, that's something that I hope for several reasons that we don't have to experience again. Once the floodwaters from Francis went away, people started trying to attempt to find out what their damages were. We got a federal declaration for disasters. We're doing a lot of paperwork, and then along comes Ivan 9 days later. And in the normal way the federal government operates, we ask them, can we lump both of these into one storm? And the answer was no. You've got two different events, so you're going to have two different storms. And if you think about a business in Biltmore Village, you've had all of your stock or a lot of it damaged, or floodwaters have gotten in there and you've got things all over everywhere. And you get it all back up, and then here comes another storm. Well, what got damaged in the second storm that wasn't damaged in the first storm? So it created a lot of problems for us that way. But anyway, we eventually got through it. But going back and looking at a little bit of the history, in May of 1973, we had a storm, and Jim Fox and I have talked a little bit about it, on Robinson Creek out in Skyland. Normally that stream is not knee deep out there. And we had some fatalities from some mobile homes that got washed away in that particular area. Then in 1975, we had a couple of storms that generated quite a bit of flooding, localized again, but in the Enka-Candler area. Then in November 1977, here came the first big one that we had experienced in several years in this area. And it affected 18 western counties, did a lot of damage, washed away a lot of private bridges, caught Biltmore Village once again, but it also affected the American Enka plant. Those of you that have been here a long time remember that plant out in Enka out there was under about 6 feet of water, and had problems all over. Rims Creek in the north end, Ivy River up in Barnardsville, just a general flood that affected everybody and everything. And as you're looking at some of these pictures that are popping up over here, think about the fact if you wanted to do any whitewater rafting, you know, that was the time to do some of that right down the middle of Biltmore Village. But anyway, 1982, we had a local flood out in the Lester community. It did a lot of damage out there to agriculture. March 1994, August 94, September 96, that was one down that was in the Broad River community, which is in the, if you remember that one, people from the Weather Service I'm sure remember that, where Broad River, which down that way is not normally too deep, but did quite a bit of damage. January 95, October 95 was the Swannanoa River again. And then we come along here, we had some localized floods in between that and 2004. And then here came the two big ones that we're talking about today. And you look at that's showing an oil storage tank that's washed up against the road right there across from Lowe's. But anyway, you look at some of that and you wonder what's going on. Why are we having, in particular, a lot more localized floods? If you remember last year, for example, we had one in the Beaver Dam community out here in North Asheville, had a cell that got up and just sat up there on top of a mountain, and that's where the house that you read a lot about in the paper started to move and slid down and eventually had to be torn down. And some of that may still, when you're talking about landslides, and hear Rick Wooten talk about those in a little while, that may still slide. In 2013, I guess, 2012 maybe, we had a slide up off the Lester Highway, if you remember. Part of that slid, but it had been filled in, and that's where a developer had filled in quite a bit on the side of the mountain up there, and created some problems there. And then this year, we had a localized flood that sat in the same spot basically as the Beaver Dam flood, except it was on the other side of the ridge and it caught Woodfin. And we had quite a bit of flooding there a few months ago that did $500,000 worth of damage. But it's something that we continuously look out for, and there's a lot of technology that's there today that was not even thought about in 1973, which makes my job and other responders, makes our job a lot easier. But in addition to that, we've had some other problems that go on that also weather affects a lot. Anybody remember the blizzard of 1993? You know, if we were around here, and that's probably the worst situation I can ever remember, because you couldn't go anywhere, you couldn't do anything. If you were at work, if you were here at the university, for example, that's where you stayed for 3 or 4 days. If you were at work, that's where you stayed. If you were at home, that's where you stayed. But had a lot of power outages and what have you. Had cold weather. Once again, goes back to the weather in Asheville at one point had several of their water lines, their main lines froze, particularly up here on Town Mountain. And that lasted about a week or so. But we've had a lot of problems in this county, and you look at what could we have done differently had we had the technology that we've got today. And certainly been working with Jim Fox for several years on a group called RENCI for a long time, and they put together some of the maps that you looked at or you're going to see today, which have helped us tremendously. Anyway, you've got, with technology, you've got satellite imagery where you can look at it from a smartphone, you look at it from a laptop or any kind of computer, get on there and look and see exactly, because of weather radar, you can track a storm, you can tell if it's coming, and our hurricanes that do the damage, mostly if they come in inland in the Gulf between Tallahassee and Mobile, about 2 days later we're going to get a lot of rain. But anyway, you can track those, and you can track them in real time. So we know exactly where these storms are, where the heavy precipitation is. You've got improved forecasting methods that the Weather Service and NOAA and all those folks do constantly. We've got a direct line with them in our Emergency Operations Center. And we constantly monitor what's going on, what they're doing. They let us know if they see something unusual. We know generally 24 hours out how much rainfall to expect. And believe it or not, you know, you folks catch a lot of grief a lot of times about, you know, a 50-50 chance of anything being right, but you're right a lot more than you're wrong. And you know, you can't help which way a cloud is going to go. So if you ever master that, you've got it made. But anyway, we do studies. We look at what went right. We look at what went wrong from past flood situations. We look at what could we have done different. I'm talking about emergency responders. And you look, for example, and we've got a couple of people here, got the chief and the deputy chief from Enka Fire Department sitting up here, and Hominy Creek runs right through their fire district. And trust me, they've had their experiences over the years with Hominy Creek out there, which today is not creating any problems, but you never know what's going to happen down the road. But they know where the creek is going to come out first. They know which businesses or which residences are going to have to maybe evacuate. They know where to respond early on, where the problems are, just as the other fire departments do in Buncombe County. Whether you had another flood, for example, in Broad River Fire Department, they know where the problems are going to start. They know at certain points what's going to happen, how long it's going to take the water to go down. What happens if you get a road closed? How do you access that particular area? But all of this is geared up to the data that you're going to be looking at today and how quickly you can get us that information so we know how to respond and we know where to respond. And trust me, it's improved many, many times since 1973 when I experienced my first flood. In addition to the studies, briefly they mentioned buying out some of the properties that are in floodplains. FEMA has a mitigation program where you can go in and purchase property. It's a voluntary program. If you, for example, owned a piece of property along the Swannanoa River and we came along and offered to purchase that property to get that residence or business out of the floodplain or out of the floodway, if you want to participate, you get paid a fair market value. And you can back out on that program up until the time you actually sign on the dotted line at closing. And we did the first buyouts in Buncombe County that were done in North Carolina, and they were done out in Candler. And we've done several since. The city of Asheville has done some. So that's a good program. It's something to look at. Early warning systems along the Swannanoa River, touched on that. You just saw a presentation on where those gauges are. I've got one concern about that though. When the city of Asheville put in all those gauges, they put those gauges in down as far as where the Swannanoa enters into or merges with the French Broad River, and there's nothing below there other than your gauge down there on Pearson Bridge. So is the assumption that it's not going to flood below there. I hope that's not the case, because if all that water were to come down through Biltmore and it gets to the French Broad River, trust me, it's going to flood on down the river in certain parts. But anyway, the iFlows program, that's been going on a long time. That's been a good program. They've had some problems with it, the state has, with their gauges over the years, but when that system, when those gauges are all working, they give real-time data. You can bring it up, you can look at it, and it's a way to know that maybe you've got localized flooding in a particular area, a particular watershed, where you may not even have any sprinkles on anywhere else in the county. You got a lot better information that are provided to us, so we in turn, along with the weather people, can provide this information to the general public. We try constantly to alert people to the fact if you live next to a stream that could flood, just because it hadn't flooded in the past 20, 25 years doesn't mean it won't flood this week. But if you live close to that, how are you going to leave that property? Do you have to cross a bridge? Do you have a second route to get out in case you're stuck? Or if you're out, can you get back in? But we want the public to realize the potential of water is a very unusual substance. Water's going to go where it wants to go when it gets high enough. And it can do a lot of damage and do a lot of damage in a hurry. But anyway, we try to let the public know, be alert, listen to your weather radio. You know, you got a smartphone, you've got an iPad, you've got anything, you've got every way in the world now to be alerted to a weather situation, to a weather watch, to a weather warning. Take advantage of that. We all working together, that's something that we need to do. It makes my job a lot easier. If we don't have to go in with boats or whatever and wade through chest deep water to bring somebody out because they didn't know that it was going to flood, and for some reason a lot of this stuff happens in the middle of the night. It doesn't happen in the daylight when you can see. But anyway, you need to encourage a lot more awareness from people. But by working together and looking at the advances in technology, and certainly the people in this room, the people that are doing these presentations today, they know how far we've come, they know what's out there, but together we need to sell that product. And with that, there's a lot of good pictures up here. Here's some good whitewater currents you're looking at right now. I don't particularly want to be out in that, but you know, that there comes a time when things like that happen, and they're going to continue to happen. But by working together, taking advantage of all the technology that's out there, the new ideas, the new programs, we'll get through this, and hopefully we can minimize a lot of the damage and save a lot of lives in the future. Thank you.